Still waking up and warming up for the night. Didn't play WoW earlier today because we were hanging out with Jenny, which is lovely. I'm playing freaky talents for this. I did not mean to do this. Oh well. Guess I'm going over at this guy. Did not mean to play these talents, but it's gonna have to do. I just domed his pet. Holy shit. Oh my god, that guy got worked. Are you kidding me? Oh no. Mercy. Yo, what's up guys? Bajheera here. For this video, I've got an Arms Warrior PvP guide for patch 10.1 of World of Warcraft Dragonflight. This one should be fun. A lot of it should be sort of reminiscent of things we talked about in the past, but there are some important changes with some of the talents I've chosen and with the stats that we stack primarily, along with a couple things that are just new for patch 10.1, like embellishments and things like that. First things first, let's just dive into the talents, because I think that is something that's probably one of the biggest things that you need to look out for. Everything else is kind of like just little things here and there. So for patch 10.0.7, we were leaning into crit. We were beginning to use Skull Splitter. You have the option between Skull Splitter or non-Skull Splitter, and that continues to be the case. But for the end of Season 1 and for the beginning of Season 2, I have been leaning into this heavy cleave AoE build. It's really fun for RBGs, definitely gets the job done into, you know, melee cleave versus melee cleave stuff that we were dealing with in Season 1. And it's really not too shabby against a lot of things that you're fighting against in Season 2, because there's just a couple little adjustments you can make depending on what you're fighting to make a build that definitely does a good amount of AoE, a little bit more tuned towards single target. But this is the basic layout here. I played two different versions of this build. One, like, I actually just like have two different things. So basically the same talents you can move over into the Shatter talent. So if you're fighting locks or things with shields, you want to go into Wrecking Throw. I go into Frothing Berserker and Wrecking Throw, and then if I am not using Wrecking Throw, I'll swap back to the other thing, which is just like, you know, the whole setup with Skull Splitter, no Shatter. And if you, for some reason, don't want to make two different builds, what you're going to be doing is this. You're going to be clicking these two off, clicking these two, and then clicking these two off, and clicking this. So instead of having to do that every single arena match, I just have two different builds. But you'll notice a couple things that we don't have is like room for extra utility. So with this setup here, this is kind of the big thing. You're going into Thunderclap or you're going into Blood and Thunder, which makes your Thunderclap, actually, it says like it spreads Rend, but it's if you have Rend, as if you have Rend talented, it will Rend everything. So basically, you're just using Thunderclap to apply Rend to everything around you, which is pretty fun, especially for Skull Splitter, and especially for the way that you burst with this build, which I'll show you just a little bit later. It's with this setup though, it is kind of tricky to get Cacophonous or Roar or Menace. It's kind of tricky to get Bitter Immunity, so you end up having to choose between like the little bit of Leech, a little bit of attack speed, or the Rage Refund and Wrecking Throw. So just keep that in mind. The main reason that you needed Menace was I just found it really easy to fear Tyrant with it, and it made the fear last a little bit longer on Tyrant. So now when you're fighting a Demonology Warlock, you just need to make sure you're like targeting the Tyrant and then fearing it. So it just takes a little bit of extra effort. Bitter Immunity was kind of cool to be able to use sometimes, but it just wasn't like a big value thing. And you are losing Uproar. So Thunderous Roar's cooldown was reduced by 30 seconds, which is like, oh man, bummer. 30 seconds is kind of a long cooldown to add on to this. So it is a bit of a bummer to lose the cooldown reduction on Thunderous Roar, but I promise you it's really not that big of a deal, and it is potentially even like quality of life better with the way that we burst with this build. And I have a very cool macro that I'll share with you that actually works better if the cooldown of Thunderous Roar and Avatar are the same. So we're losing a little bit of utility with this, but it ends up being pretty okay because it gives you access to Shockwave, which is actually a 3-second stun in PvP. That's why we're using Shockwave now, is because all the extra utility that we got is pretty cool, but none of it quite lines up with how good a 40-second AoE frontal stun is. You also get to take this talent, which is kind of neat. It increases your stamina by 5% and reduces the duration of Fear, Sap, and Incap effects on you by 10%, and Warlocks are out in force these days, so reducing the duration of Fear on you is kind of nice. The unfortunate part about this, besides the fact that we lose access to some other cool utility, is that you have to take essentially a dead talent. In order to access these two, you have to take either Barbaric Training or Seismic Reverberation, both of which do nothing at all, because we never press Whirlwind and never press Slam. So dead talent, but it gives you access to some powerful tankiness and utility, and then of course extra crowd control, which is really nice. Now on this side of the tree, A lot of it looks really similar, with a couple little changes. So we're still playing Skull Splitter. That was a question that I see and saw a lot, is, hey, I saw Skull Splitter got nerfed. Do we still play it? I mean, Skull Splitter still puts people down, man, I'm telling you. It's a game finisher. It's a cooldown forcer. It's still good. What ended up happening with arms was they buffed bleeds just overall, and then they had to nerf Skull Splitter a little bit so that the bleeds weren't just a buff to Skull Splitter. Now, I do think that Skull Splitter ended up being a little bit weaker, but not by much. It's still good. It's still worth playing. I still like it. We still clap people with it, so I still think it's good. If you guys hadn't seen the 10.0.7 guide, basically what we're doing with this setup here is giving us just a ton of bleed damage, and we're using Skull Splitter to make those bleeds expire instantly. And some people don't understand how Skull Splitter works. So it's basically like you would have a bleed that would last 20 seconds and deal damage over 20 seconds. But instead, Skull Splitter will make your deep wounds, when talented with Tide of Blood, that is, will make your deep wounds and rend do all the damage that it would have done over 27 seconds or 20 seconds or whatever, instantly, right? So it's big burst and you apply your bleeds again. It's not just your bleeds just fall off, right? It's worth it. It's worth it. And I'm also taking Blood Surge, which is kind of like a weird little talent, but when you have, you know, bleeds on 1,000,000 targets, it can feed you rage pretty nicely. And Thunderclap with Ignore Pain and Mortal Strike, those are kind of like rage-hungry abilities. And so having a little bit of rage makes your rotation a lot smoother. Some of the things that you're gonna change when you are fighting different stuff is that right now I usually use Warbreaker, and I'm actually using improved Sweeping Strikes. Once again, just to cleave like crazy whenever there's multiple targets that you can hit. Now, when you are just pretty much going to be only single targeting something down, the two talents that I'm going to change, I don't really mess around with anything over here, usually. But what I will change, I'll go to Blood Instruments, then I'll go to Strength of Arms, if you're really only going to be single targeting something down. So you don't need Sweeping Strikes really so much, unless you can reliably cleave your stuff around, and if you can't, then just single target time, Strength of Arms, back over power damage and crit, whatever. And then Blood Instruments is actually kind of nice to make that initial Colossus Smash hit do more damage, and to make the debuff last a little bit longer on just that one particular target. It is absolutely a fine idea to remove Unhinged for something else, maybe like Massacre, maybe like Executioner's Precision or Fatality, or just improved Execute, or even like Fueled by Violence if you want like a defensive benefit, because the situations where you're going to remove Unhinged are against things with like 1,000,000 pets, right? So you go to Bladestorm a Demo Lock, and you would love for that Unhinged to hit the Demo Lock, but instead it hits his 7th Imp, right? And it just tanks that, it doesn't do anything for you. A lot of times, admittedly, I will not actually remove Unhinged, because there are a lot of times where the lock just kind of gates away and they're by themselves, and you leave after them and they want to Death Coil you, and you Bladestorm their Death Coil, and then you also slap them with 2 Unhinged, you know, Mortal Strikes. That happens sometimes. But if you want to drop that, you can drop it for either some different types of offense or defense for Fueled by Violence. So those are really the only 3 talents that I usually will find myself messing around with, is moving Unhinged around, changing from one of these, and changing from one of these for various sort of single target, or like if there's, these two are sort of single target versus cleave choices. This one's sort of like, can I actually reliably unhinge something, or is it like there's 1,000,000 pets, Unhinged is unreliable, I'm just gonna go and be tankier by healing off my deep wounds off the 1,000,000 pets when I Bladestorm. That's a fine option too. Honor talents, they're pretty much the same thing as always. Just for like raw, just running around killing stuff, I actually like this combo. Warbringer got nerfed a little bit to make it do less damage, but I think the root is a much more reliable AoE like cone, so that's kind of cool. I love Storm of Destruction, especially with this build. Storm of Destruction applying mortal wounds to everything is awesome. Also, it makes it a much shorter cooldown, so you can get those sort of like big unhinged Bladestorm, anger management, cooldown reduction on there, like just all of this, right? All that's nice. Then you never unspec sharpen basically, unless you're fighting something that doesn't heal itself, but it's very rare. Against like Rep Paladins, Warriors, like Fury Warriors, Arms Warriors, Disarm's fantastic. Against things with CC chains or things that are likely going to try to CC you on your cooldowns, War Banner's excellent. I really don't play the other talents very much, except for Demolition, of course. Demolition is a go-to against Warlocks. So you're going to play Wrecking Throw, Demolition, and you're good to go, right? You're just going to be able to shatter every time they have their little lock shield up. You're going to want to shatter that thing off, and this will make it a super short cooldown and make it hit really hard. So Demolition into Warlocks, Disarm into Rep Paladins, Warriors, Rogues, MM Hunters, really anything that can be weakened by not having weapons. A lot of things don't really care, but some of those classes do. And I love Storm of Destruction, but I'll switch that out for Banner or Disarm if I really need a bunch of extra defensives. But the first thing to go is Warbringer. This is like the main flex talent. Storm of Destruction is like, I really like this one, but I'll drop it if I have to, and then Sharpen's like all the time you use that. So that's my favorite combo. I think we reviewed this pretty well. I didn't walk you through every single talent. But if you guys are like, I'm sort of like making these guides as if they've sort of built off of themselves, right? So we had like the first guide, and then we had the 10.7 guide, and we had this one. If this is your first ever guide that you're looking at, I would just encourage you to go through and read your talents and understand what they do. But this is like a good solid setup for it. There's some synergy there, there's a good amount of utility, and some big damage. And I will talk to you guys about the damage. I alluded to a macro that I use, but I'll go over a couple of the different macros. I don't want to go over all my macros because I've done that in the past, but I'd like to go over a couple of them for you, because there are a couple cool ones that I think are neat. Let me go ahead and quickly swap to this, just because some of my bar is like not showing. Like a lot of this is like disarm, banner. Some of it is bitter immunity, which I don't even really hardly ever use with this particular build anymore, so I could change that perhaps. But anyway, some of the macros that are specific for this build right here are things like Cancel Aura Bladestorm to Shockwave. We have Cancel Aura Bladestorm to Thunderclap. Those are just some basic stuff. And once again, if you guys are new, then just go look at my macros video. That should walk you through a lot of my basic macros. But this right here is going to just give you some of the basics. So one of the main macros that I think is not just like intuitive, like some of the basic stuff, is this. I don't use a lot of cast sequence macros. I find them to be a little bit clunkier and oftentimes end up doing things that you didn't really want to do, or don't allow you to do things that you do want to do in like the right order and stuff. But in a situation like this, where I want to press Warbreaker, and then oftentimes I would love to get the Dragon Roar, or Thunderous Roar as it's called, off right before I press Avatar, so that, because whenever you press Avatar, it's going to Bladestorm, right? I actually like to do it like this. I feel like I get a lot of value out of it like this. There's another way that you could do it, and I'll talk about it, but basically, I really like the fact that Avatar procs a Bladestorm. It's just unpeelable damage, right? You can't be peeled during it. You're unhinging Mortal Strikes on people. You're also doing 20% more damage during this time. It's cool. And Avatar Bladestorm is also off global, which is neat. But once again, if you want to get your Dragon Roar off immediately, it kind of is a little bit tricky. But there's a couple ways to go about it. Anyway, before I get ahead of myself, this is the cast sequence macro. What this will do is this will, every time, it will make you cast Thunderous Roar, and the very next press of this macro, it's a multiple stage thing, so you need to like press it multiple times. The first time you press it, it'll cast Thunderous Roar. The second time you press it, it'll cast Avatar. But remember, Avatar is not on global, so you can just spam this thing. And as soon as you can Thunderous Roar, you'll Thunderous Roar, and as soon as you press the button again, it'll Avatar you. It also casts Ignore Pain. It puts you in battle stance, and it will pop your trinket. So, looks like this. Now, one thing I want to remind you of is that you can Bladestorm before this, so you could like Warbreaker Bladestorm, and then you can do the macro. But the thing is, your Thunderous Roar isn't getting max value, but the initial hit will be more. So I'll Sweeping Strikes this, basically how you burst. Sweeping Strikes, charge in, Warbreaker. Now watch, I'm spamming the macro, Thunderous Roar goes off, and then I Bladestorm immediately after, right? And he scores. Curtains. Curtains. Which I guess that leads me to like a second thing that people ask me a lot, which is how you use Skull Splitter. But that's the basics behind that macro. It's really cool. It's one of the only situations where I actually will use a cast sequence, but that's how I use it. So for Skull Splitter, basically the way that you use it before is a lot of times you would play the Warlord's Torment so that you would get a Recklessness proc whenever you press Warbreaker or Avatar, and you would use like Rend, Warbreaker, Skull Splitter with crit, and it would blast people. Now you can do pretty much the same thing now, right? Random, Warbreaker, Skull Splitter, right? That way you have a very fresh Rend, you have a very fresh Deep Wounds, and then you Skull Splitter them. Now, the thing about this particular build is it allows you to overstack your Rend and your Deep Wounds a lot, in my opinion, a little bit more comfortably. I'm just gonna kill these things real quick just to spend some rage, and then we'll go beat up Ayanga again. And just in general, the rotation for this is the same as it kind of was before, where you're prioritizing Mortal Strike, even though I Thunderclap first there, I saw that. You're prioritizing Mortal Strike, Execute, Overpower, and keeping your bleeds up. But, like I was saying, so for this setup here, what you can do is one of your first globals can actually be Thunderclap, Warbreaker, press your Gigaburst macro, you get the Bladestorm off, which is overstacking Deep Wounds, one more Thunderclap, and you'll notice you have like, usually Deep Wounds is how much? How many seconds? 18 seconds, right? But because you're refreshing the deep wounds before it's over, it actually stacks up to like 23 seconds. Same thing with Rend. Rend is usually like 21 seconds, but because you thunderclapped in the beginning of your burst, you did your Blade Storm, and then you thunderclapped again for a fresh thunderclap at the end of your Blade Storm, that is going to allow you to have overcapped, like overstacked bleeds for extra damage. So once again, like, these guys won't live for this, but I thunderclapped them, I Warbreaker, and then you see at the end how my bleeds were like 23 and 27 seconds whenever I did the second thunderclap. That extra duration of your bleeds is going to get consumed by Skull Splitter and make it do just that much more damage. You're going to get like a couple, maybe like a couple extra ticks, 2 or 3 maybe, I don't know what the math is on the ticks. Especially also depends on your haste. You're going to get a couple extra ticks of bleed in that Skull Splitter to make it just that much more ferocious. And you also have Avatar up as a result, right? So if you need to, you can go for the Skull Splitter, like cancel or a Blade Storm Skull Splitter, and just take the Rend stacks that you have. Or you can go for that like overstacked one last thunderclap into Skull Splitter. So once again, charge in. Sweeping Strike should already be up by the time you run in. We thunderclap, hit the macro, one more thunderclap, boom, big Skull Splitter. So how you want to use Skull Splitter is usually during your Warbreaker, but it's okay to use it outside of Warbreaker because you're just sort of like, if the match is on a timer, right, and the bleed damage is just like, if you have bleeds like 100% uptime on your bleeds, right, like you're just consuming those bleeds faster and just doing more damage over time. But if it lines up with Warbreaker like a couple seconds off, like you want to get your Skull Splitter off during your Warbreaker. And it's easier to do that sometimes when Warbreaker is available, because it also applies a nice fresh set of deep wounds, which is nice. But that's one of the main burst combos with this build, and I think that macro is really nice. Sometimes you are going to want to bind Avatar separately, just in case there are times where you want to like quickly Avatar Blade Storm to avoid CC, or you want to have Avatar Blade Storm out of roots. But for me, that's one of the tricky things about this setup, is I don't really like to use Blade Storm just to get out of roots, because Blade Storm's such a big part of your damage, right? But you can do it that way. I don't right now have a different Dragon Roar macro, or Dragon Roar button, because I pretty much only want to use Thunderous Roar as part of this big burst. But just be mindful of that, is that you may sometimes want to Avatar Blade Storm off global to avoid CC. But the burst combo is pretty fun, and I think it's neat that you can very comfortably make use of the double stack. And it's pretty smooth too, right? You just charge in, get one more thunderclap. See, that's 27 and 22. That's a big amount of bleeds going off right there, all at one time, which is pretty cool. You can, if you want to, I think it's worth mentioning. If you don't like Skull Splitter, if you're just like, man, I hate playing Skull Splitter, it's annoying. You've tried it, you've tried to practice with it, you just can't really get it down, it just feels bad. You don't have to play it if you don't want to. Another build that you can play very easily and comfortably is something like this, right? You can move your talents around however you want. You could maybe take all the execute stuff, right? You could take no cooldown execute, you could take 35% health execute, and you could take execute makes your mortal strikes hit a little harder. You could put more points into utility, you could play fatality, you could get this kind of thing. You don't have to play the Skull Splitter if you don't want to. I think that's fine just to just pump damage. You're not really worried about setting up a Skull Splitter because it's just kind of clunky to worry about managing your bleeds before you do it. That's all fine, but I think Skull Splitter is still worth playing if that's just kind of the only thing that you're curious about. Next thing I want to talk about is stats. In Season 2, they nerfed the extra damage that crit does. It used to do 175% damage. Now it does 150% damage. The Arms Warrior tier set also got changed to benefit from crit a little bit, but not nearly the same way and as powerfully, in my opinion. So the 2 set, remember, it's also cut in half in PvP. Deep Wounds increases your chance to critically strike and critical strike damage dealt to afflicted targets by 2%, is what it says. It doesn't say 2.5 either, it says 2, but it's probably 2.5. And then your 4 set, when you get it, is Deep Wounds. Critical strikes have a chance to increase the damage of your next mortal strike by 5%, and cause it to deal a certain amount of damage, which may also be cut in half to enemies in front of you. Stack them 3 times, which is kind of cool, kind of fun. This is actually, if you read it, it's a Skull Splitter set, right? So how the heck are you going to stack damage on a Mortal Strike when you're pressing Mortal Strike on cooldown, which is what you do. Another frequently asked question is, do you stack overpowers before Mortal Strike? No, you just press Mortal Strike on cooldown. So how the heck are you going to get more than one stack ever of a chance for deep wounds, critical strikes to give you, you know, damage on your mortal strike. Well, how that happens is Skull Splitter. Skull Splitter consumes, you know, 20 seconds worth of deep wounds. Maybe a couple of those crit. You get a couple extra points of damage on your sharpened blade mortal strike that you do after Skull Splitter. That's how that works. It's still not that great. The moral of the story is we are no longer stacking crit. Right now, I'm stacking haste. I think haste feels great on arms. Makes your globals really fluid. Just kind of helps you pump. It does a little bit more damage with your bleeds as well, since your bleeds more haste is more bleed ticks. And then I'm going mastery after that. So it's verse, haste, mastery, crit is the stat priority that I'm working with on arms right now. And it does feel pretty good. My gear, once again, is not going to be optimized at this point in the season. So if you're looking at my my armory and you're like, well, hey, what the heck? Why do you have a mastery sword then? It's because that's what the vault blessed me with. It's like, wait, why are you using Shadow Flame Wreath? Do you like it? Not really. I think it's really good for Fury. I don't think it's good for arms, but hey, man, I gotta test this stuff for you guys. My recommendation for enchants would be Sophic. So this is the part of the video where things get a little disorganized because I'm just gonna be continuing to stream of consciousness this stuff for you. But I'd recommend Sophic on your weapon. Once, because just strength is just nice. It'll scale your hits, it'll scale your bleeds. But also remember, you do get increased strength by 25%, and so whenever you proc Sophic Devotion, it's going to be benefiting from your 2 set on your trinkets, right? I went ahead and made the Shadow Flame Wreath embellishment for my helmet, or the Shadow Flame, whatever it's called, Rouse Shadow Flame, also really bad. It does, I think it scales up your Shadow Flame enchant as well. But yeah, this does very, very little damage. But you know what? Everything does very, very little, except for precog. This is kind of cool, getting a little bit of strength. This is kind of, you know, useless, but that's kind of how it works, right? You have all the embellishments are like 1% damage, and then there's precog, which is like God mode, changes the game entirely, levels of power, and everything else is just bad. So I'm trying the Shadow Flame thing. Not in love with it, but maybe Gathering Storm would be much cheaper and maybe just as good. I think maybe potentially the best embellishment actually right now, aside from this one for Warrior, would probably actually be the Versatility Mastery chest that gives you just a versatility proc. I went ahead and picked my chest though from the 1600 rated token that you get, and I went ahead and made a chest for haste verse. But if I hadn't done that yet, and something I might do on my alts who haven't gotten that token yet, is I'm gonna probably craft the chest and just grab a different piece and see how that goes. Because I think that chest piece that gives you versatility is probably the best thing you can get, even though it's probably like one of the least expensive things. But I'm still socketing for haste. I'm still enchanting for haste. I am still enchanting for speed on all this stuff. And I think that we'll continue to do that on arms. But I have 3 warriors, and on 2 of the warriors I haven't spent any conquest whatsoever. So I will very likely make one of those guys a committed Fury warrior to not have to mess with gear so much, because we're making an arms guide right now, but Fury is pretty real. It's pretty real, and it does well into casters, and there's a lot of casters in the meta these days. I think arms still is great. I think arms is the better spec into cleaves, but I think Fury could potentially be a better spec into some of the caster stuff that we're fighting. So Warriors are in a good spot right now. I mean, arms is good, Fury's good, so you know you're not really going wrong there. But I think that just about wraps up most of what I want to talk about, which are the big talent changes, going more into Thunderclap, Blood and Thunder, and continuing to play Skull Splitter. I wanted to go over the macros for you guys, just a couple stop Bladestorming and Shockwave, cancel our Bladestorm, Thunderclap, and that really neat macro of the cast sequence right here. This is a cool one. This is a fun one. Yeah, and I think we talked about this because I think we went over Skull Splitter in the other video, but just in case we hadn't, this is basically what it looked like for a Skull Splitter, right? You're canceling your Bladestorm, you're Skull Splitting, and you're casting Sharpened Blade, because the next button you want to press after Skull Splitter is Mortal Strike. Just to keep your deep wounds back up. You can also press Bladestorm, but I want to get a Mortal Strike back on the target. I want to get a deep wounds back on the target. Mortal Strike won't fall off, but I want to get deep wounds on the target. And after Skull Splitter is a big hit, and it's usually going to force some kind of cooldown response, either from what you're hitting or from like the healer. So having a Sharpened Blade after your Skull Splitter is very, very nice. If you use you can use Sharpened Blade into Skull Splitter, it's fine. But if you didn't, then it would be good to have that next Mortal Strike hit hard and really reduce healing. It's just a tremendous amount of pressure. So this kind of macro is good for that too. We need to just put this in there. Yeah, we need to put the new trinket. My cooldown should have already been popped, but just in case. We don't want Crimson anymore. We want Obsidian. There we go. Double check those macros, guys. And we have that one. We're good then. Do we have it in this one? We got it in this one. Okay, we're good. We're good. For a little while there, I was experimenting with cast sequence with Skull Splitter across Smash. I didn't like it, so I put 2 slashes in there to cancel it. But you can try it too if you want to. Anyway, I think that about covers it, guys. That should get you started with the talent build, with the stat priority, with the embellishments. I even showed you a little bit of the rotation. Talked about priority with your abilities. And somehow, if you made it to the end of the video, you know, you're a champion. You guys know how these guides go, man. You get me started talking about warrior stuff. It's going to take a while. There's a lot to talk about. And I don't go over a ton of the basics, like what each ability does, and walk you through that. But hopefully, if you just kind of mouse over your abilities and read it a little bit, you'll get an idea of what's going on. And I encourage you to do that. But what I do want to set you up with is some of the things like talents and stuff like that to get you on the right track. Of course, we'll keep you updated as time goes on. I'd like to make a Fury guide for you as well, but I haven't really played as much Fury, but I can still teach you some of the basics. We are also streaming pretty much every day live on Twitch. D4 is coming up though, guys. We're gonna be playing a lot of Diablo 4, but until then and even after that, we'll be playing a good amount of WoW. So you guys can always swing by the stream, ask questions. My stream schedule these days is usually gym stream in the morning from around 10 a.m. to like noon PST. Then we usually hop on the gaming stream around 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. PST, take a short break, hang out with the family, and then game from about 8:30 p.m. PST to like 11 or 12:30 p.m. PST while we do our treadmill. And that's on the weekdays. On weekends, we usually only hop on for the late night gaming stream, but every day should feature the late night gaming stream starting around 8:30 p.m. PST if you guys want to tune up that. Also, the VODs are always available, so you can check out those. And like I said, we'll continue to have plenty of WoW content for you here on YouTube. So make sure you guys subscribe, make sure you follow the stream, make sure you enable notifications on both platforms, and you'll be good to go. Not miss a thing. All right? Make sure you guys show the video a big old thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.